This is Resonance 104.4 FM. Flippin' marvellous. How you doing? It's time for another slice of literary London with me, Nick Hennegan. Also on bohemianbritain.com, which is kind of there. Why is it there? I was there because this radio show, I mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. This radio show, it was someone like Podbean, one of the organisations anyway, quoted this radio show, Literary London, on Resonance 104.4 FM as being in the top 5 Bohemian podcasts to listen to in the world. Hey? Oh, yes, indeed. I didn't get anything for it apart from the recognition, of course, but it made me smile slightly. And so I set up a Bohemian Britain during the Edinburgh Fringe a couple of 3 years ago, and I just dump all sorts of stuff, including this lovely show as well. So it's I sort of put all that on Bohemian Britain. Well, of course, you can hear it again on Resonance 104.4 FM. So I hope you've had a good week. I had a lot of feedback from last week's show where we were talking about writers' hints and tips from J.R. Tolkien. So I thought we'd probably kick off with doing a similar thing this week. Yeah, talking about writerly birthdays. Yes, indeed. And I must mention, in fact, 28th of January 1935, David Lodge was born. Sadly, he passed away just a couple of weeks ago. And I was quite fond of him because he spent quite a lot of time, I mean, he was an author, obviously, but also a literary critic. And he spent quite a lot of time working at Birmingham University. And in fact, I've just bought a book. Is it The Art of Fiction? I think it's The Art of Fiction. I just bought literally the day I bought the book, he passed away. Nothing to do with me, of course. He was credited with perhaps bringing us the sort of collegiate writings, sort of novels that satirised academic life, particularly the campus trilogy. His books, Small World and Nice Work, were both shortlisted for the Booker Prize, which is quite interesting. Yes. And again, some quotes for him, which I think are quite good. David Lodge quotes, he said, "Literature is mostly about having sex and not much about having children. Life is the other way round." This quote's quite good. "When does a novel begin? The question is almost as difficult to answer as the question, when does the human embryo become a person?" This is quite useful as well. I like this quote. "Universities are the cathedrals of the modern age. They shouldn't have to justify their existence by utilitarian criteria." Excuse me, very common at the moment, very pertinent, of course, with the debate in the United Kingdom about university funding. Just what else? There's a few other quotes, which is I quite like. "Life, after all," he said, "should go forwards, not backwards. And information is the religion of the modern world." Again, very relevant at the moment. That's David Lodge, the author David Lodge, born on the 28th of January 1935. And as I say, passed away rather sadly a couple of weeks ago. A good friend to Birmingham University. Who else are we celebrating this week? 25th of January was born in 1874 the writer W. Somerset Maugham. W. Somerset Maugham, he passed away in December 1965. He's got some great quotes as well. I'll give a few of those quotes here because he wrote, one of his quotes is, "To acquire the habit of reading is to construct for yourself a refuge from almost all the miseries of life." That's great. And this, particularly if you are a writer, there are 3 rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are, which I think is quite good. Again, if you're a writer, another quote from W. Somerset Maugham. "The only important thing in a book is the meaning that it has for you." Yes, that's quite an interesting one, isn't it? "Habits in writing," he said, "are in life are only useful if they are broken as soon as they cease to be advantageous." Yes. "The crown of literature is poetry." He also said, "Writing is the supreme solace," and I quite like this. "Death is a very dull, dreary affair, and my advice to you is have nothing whatsoever to do with it." So W. Somerset Maugham, a British writer, of course, although he was actually, apart from being a novelist and short story writer, he was actually born in Paris. So he spoke French before he spoke English. His parents passed away when he was only 10 years old, so after a very unhappy boyhood, which he records of in his Of Human Bondage, he then became a qualified physician, but writing was his true vocation, and he did rather well of it. He was rather well at it. He was amongst the most popular writers of his era, and reputedly the highest paid author during the 1930s. Yeah. Good for him. So W. Somerset Maugham, born 25th of January 1874 and died the 16th of December 1965. Who else can we celebrate? Let's have a look through here. We've got, what about this one? Yes, Francis Bacon. No, not that one. The writer Francis Bacon. Born on the 22nd of January 1561. Hey, we're going all over the place today, aren't we? Oh, yeah. He died the 9th of April 1626, but he had some great quotes. The monuments of wit, he wrote or quoted, the monuments of wit survive the monuments of power, which is very interesting, isn't it? A wise man will make more opportunities than he finds. And he also said, this is sounds a bit 1500s, doesn't it? Reading maketh a full man, confidence a ready man, and writing an exact man. He also said, the job of the artist is always to deepen the mystery. Yes, I quite like this quote too. The less people speak of their greatness, the more we think of it. Age, he said, appears to be best in 4 things. Old wood, best to burn. Old wine, to drink. Old friends, to trust. And old authors, to read. Nice one, and I really like this one. There's 2 actually. Man prefers to believe what he prefers to be true, which I think is quite relevant at the moment politically. But I like this one. He said, where are we now? Yes, if a man be gracious and courteous to strangers, it shows he's a citizen of the world. Yes, and actually I will just give you one more. Write down the thoughts of the moment. Those that come unsought for are commonly the most valuable. So Sir Francis Bacon, English philosopher, statesman, scientist. He did a lot, actually. He was a jurist, orator, essayist, author. He also served as Attorney General and Lord Chancellor of England. Born the 22nd of January 1561. Passed away the 9th of April 1626. And now you know, a lot of people you can bore at a dinner party with that one. So who else could I briefly celebrate with you? Crikey, of course we can't not mention Virginia Woolf, of course. Virginia Woolf was born on the 25th of January 1882 and died on the 28th of March 1941. And she has a sort of rather tragic story, actually. I mean, we feature her in the London Literary Pub Crawl, which I wrote. Her end was rather sad, of course. She ended up taking her own life. She drowned herself, basically, put on her best overcoat, walked into the waters of the River Ouse, and a month later a bunch of children found her body. She left a note for her husband, which I actually read on the Literary Pub Crawl, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. I mean, obviously it's a suicide note, but very heartbreaking. I won't do it here because we don't really have time, do we? But yes, Virginia Woolf. And of course, what a terrible, terrible loss. But she had some great quotes. Of course, perhaps her most famous quote, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she's to write fiction." I also quite like, she said, "I would venture to guess that Anon, who wrote so many poems without signing them, was often a woman." She also said, "Nothing has really happened until it has been recorded. And the poet gives us his essence, but prose takes the mould of the body and mind," which I quite like, because a lot of people say how poetry is the kind of the crown of literature. That's quite nice. She also said, "I meant to write about death, only life came breaking in as usual." So, of course, she was also a very important figure in London literary society, a member of the Bloomsbury Group. What was the quote? "They lived in squares and loved in triangles," or something, I think was the quote. Her most famous works include, of course, the novels Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, A Room of One's Own, and Orlando. And I saw a very interesting theatre version of Orlando at the Edinburgh Fringe a few years ago. It was great. Interesting, Virginia Woolf as well, and her writings kind of were revived with the feminist writings in the 1970s. She was married, of course, as well to author and publisher Leonard Woolf, and it was him she wrote when she ended her life, 28th of March 1941. But someone else who's celebrating a birthday wrote this.
The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd, because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead, there were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the Walrus said, that they could get it clear? "I doubt it," said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "O oysters, come and walk with us," the Walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4, to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave his oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd, because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low. And all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the Walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the Carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the Walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the Walrus said. "Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The Carpenter said nothing but, "Cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the Walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The Carpenter said nothing but, "The butter's spread too thick." "I weep for you," the Walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size. Holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes, "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none, and this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one.
That was cool, wasn't it? The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll, another of the writers that we're celebrating, as it were, the birthday of. Yes, that makes sense, doesn't it? Yes, Lewis Carroll, who was born 27th of January 1832. He passed away on the 14th of January 1898, and of course he also, famously wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Those character of Alice has been, all sorts of versions have been done on that, haven't they? I quite like the fact he had a few quotes as well, didn't he? What was a few quotes from here? Because his nonsense verse, of course, arguably one of the Beatles' most famous songs was influenced by Lewis Carroll. I am the Walrus. Yes, it's. Where are we now? It's. Yes, it is absolutely, and I'm glad about that as well. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be. I'm Nick Hennegan. This is Literary London on Resonance 104.4 FM, celebrating literary birthdays again this week. And also, I've got a bit of news. Have you, Nick? Yeah, I've got a bit of news. Turns out a play I wrote nearly 30 years ago called A Ghost of a Chance is making a return to the London stage. It's not West End, but it's rather lovely. It's the Tabard Theatre at the Tabard, which is in Chiswick W4, just next door to Turnham Green Tube Station. And I know the people there for a while, and I just happened to mention casually to someone that we got this play, and it's not the world's greatest play. I quite like the review. The review I liked best, it said it's a cross between the horror film Poltergeist and Faust. And it is a Faustian story about a man who is down on his luck. He's got a son and a wife. And actually, shall I give it away? I'll give it a bit. He's been made redundant and he can't tell his wife because it happened once before and she took it very badly. He's run out of money. He's run out of luck. For days, weeks, he's been getting up in the morning and pretending to go to work. Comes home a bit drunk one night. And his son eventually finds out what's going on, his young son. But then something happens. Something arrives, should we call it an entity? An entity arrives, which offers him, possibly, the way out. Also fills the fridge with 30 grand. That was quite difficult to do theatrically, but never mind, we'll do it again. Anyway, I'm delighted to say that it's going to be on in April at the Tabard Theatre at the Tabard, Chiswick, and I say Bath Road, Chiswick W4, Land and W4, an area which I know and love because I live there at the moment. Although we are being made redundant. Our house apparently has been put up for sale, our flat. But anyway, that aside. And we did it in Birmingham a few years ago. I was very fortunate in that I had the superstar director called John Adams, who was one half of the new writing company Payne's Plough. The company's called Payne's Plough, by the way, after the pints they were drinking and the pub they were in. Yes. He then went on, John Adams, to run the Bolton Octagon and then Birmingham Repertory Theatre, which is where I got to know him. And then he went and ran a few other companies. And he's a good egg. And in fact, I'm going to try and get him in for an interview. We do this occasional series called Bohemian Britons. And he's got a fascinating story. And he saw the script and said, yes, I'd like to direct it, which was lovely. And because he was directing it, I was very fortunate to get a fairly famous, classically trained actor who was better known for being on soaps. His name was Paul Henry, and he played a character called Benny in Crossroads. Crossroads and Coronation Street were the two competitors, really, in the United Kingdom for soaps. I actually got to know Noel Gordon, who played the lead part in Crossroads for many, many years. And in fact, there's just been a TV drama called Nolly. And I got to know her through working on a radio station in the Midlands called BRMB. And after she was sort of axed from Crossroads, it was a very big national news affair. She very kindly came and helped me out open a Scouts bonfire in Hall Green in Birmingham. Yeah, she came. She was fantastic, and she should have been there for 20 minutes, and she stayed for 3 hours talking to people and turned up in his massive Rolls Royce, which was too big to actually get down the entrance to the little field where this bonfire was being held. But Nolly, very fond memories. In fact, do you know what? I'm going to do it. Oh, yeah. I'm going to play the theme tune. This, my loves, is the theme tune from the UK television soap called Crossroads, written by Tony Hatch, who at that point was phenomenal. I mean, he did all sorts of television work So see what you think anyway. This is the Tony Hatch Orchestra and the Crossroads theme. Yeah, baby. Ah, that was marvellous. I'm imagining there are people of a certain age in the United Kingdom going, oh yeah, I remember the Tony Hatch Orchestra and the theme from Crossroads, television soap, which ran for, I'm not sure how long it ran for, many years though. And Paul Henry, who played this character called Benny, he was famously, when the Falklands thing happened, apparently the soldiers used to call the locals Bennies because Paul's character was slightly. I used to walk around it was an odd job, and he wasn't the sharpest block, and sharpest tool in the block, as I used to say. He'd walk around with a furry hat, with a sort of cap on, woolen hat. That's what I'm looking for. Yes, and apparently the soldiers in the Falklands referred to the local Falklanders as Bennies. And then there's a story that goes all with that, but I can't repeat it now because it's obviously before the watershed. But yes, Paul Henry, and he trained classically at Birmingham with the Chappies, as he used to call it, Birmingham School of Speech and Drama, and Noel Edmonds, what am I saying? Noel Gordon, of course, who was the sort of maitre d' for many years when I was growing up anyway. And I actually got to know them also through the Scouts. I'm a big fan of the Scouts, actually. I was thinking about it. I had a conversation in the pub, funnily enough, with a mate of mine the other night about Scout Association. And because I've got friends now that I would never have met had I not joined the Scouts. I mean, I have to say it's because my brother ran a Scout troop, a Sea Scout troop, because we're in Birmingham, in the Midlands. So, of course, we're Sea Scouts. Yeah. And so I was sort of dragged along, really, and actually ended up liking it. And still, one of my best mates, Brian. All right, Brian. Who I would never have known had it not been for the Scouts, Brian Norton. We're still in touch, and in fact I'm going to go and see him at the weekend, aren't I? Yes, you are. And I'm quite good. The other thing that we got involved in then was the gang show, because you've heard about gang shows. They go back to the Second World War, I think. Ralph Reeder had this thing about a gang show, and most sort of Scout, or a lot of Scout areas used to do them, and most were sort of little rinky-tink pianos in village halls. Not Birmingham. Oh no, the Birmingham gang show was at the Birmingham Hippodrome. It's got the biggest stage house in Europe outside the West End. It seats 2,000 people. There's an orchestra pit for 25 members of the orchestra. And then little gits like me walking on and singing songs like Around the Marble Arch, Around the Marble Arch. And it was remarkable that we were able to experience that. I mean, I have to say, it didn't make me want to be an actor or anything. I was quite terrified by the whole thing. But the director of the time was a chap called Alan Coleman, who was also then directing Crossroads. And I got to know him. We had Peter Harris, Peter Love, who was the musical director, who went on, I think he's still the only Emmy award-winning television director in the UK, because he went on to direct The Muppets, for instance, which were made in Birmingham. So when I got to know Alan Coleman, and I got to know the family and his sons, and then his son went there, he was basically then headhunted, Alan was. He was headhunted by Reg Grundy to go to Australia. And so he did. He went to Australia, because things called fast turnaround TV, it's quite a skill, doing sort of 4 or 5 episodes a week. So he went to Australia and set up things like Young Doctors and Sons and Lovers and Neighbours. And so, and his older son then came back, stayed with me for a while in Birmingham when he wanted to come back. So we've got this family connection, all because of the Scouts. So, and writers. And I've gone on a bit, haven't I? But I'm excited. So if you're around, if you're in London in April, come and see A Ghost of a Chance. I'm not sure that Paul Henry will do it again. I don't think he'd particularly want to, really. I mean, it was quite a demanding part. There's only 2 people in it and a voice. So that's A Ghost of a Chance, which is going to be at the theatre at the Tabard. And if you've got anything happening again, then let me know. I had a lot of response from the show last week, so thank you for that. I'd love to hear from you. You can get me at radio@mavericktheatre.co.uk, radio@mavericktheatre.co.uk, or I've got my own special Bohemian Britain email now. Nick, N-I-C-K, at bohemianbritain.com. Nick, N-I-C-K, at bohemianbritain, which is one word, of course, .com. And it'd be great to hear from you. If you've got an event happening, then do get in touch. And that's about all we've got time for. We celebrated these birthdays, had some nuggets from some of the best writers in the world, and I've played you the Crossroads theme. Thank you. Yes, I think that's sorted the whole week out, really, hasn't it? Yes. So thank you very much for your company. Do get in touch. It'd be great to hear from you. I'll see you next time. I'm Nick Hennegan on bohemianbritain.com, but of course, mainly with Literary London on Resonance 104.4 FM.